Good, good. Vinny, you're going to laugh, so bear with the question. And we bet on your answer. So this is how good I think Saquon Barkley is. I asked Ravi, I said, hey, if the Commanders could only change one thing, do you think they would pick taking care of the ball or being able to stop Saquon Barkley? And I get it. It sounds funny because you always want to take care of the ball. My partner says stop Saquon. And at first I wasn't going to argue with him, but I was like, no. Like they would clean up the turnovers. What would you say? Stop Saquon or don't turn the ball over?
Well, I'll say that Saquon, when he had the long touchdown, the Commanders were still in the game, and they were still in the game beyond that. But when they had the turnovers, that's when they took themselves out of the game. So I'll just preface that. I think with a guy like Saquon Barkley, if you told Commanders fans we're going to hold him to less than 150 yards rushing in this game, you'd say, okay, we're in business. We might have a chance of winning it. But what happened was the turnovers happened, a lot of short fields for the Eagles. A.J. Brown decided to come through in a big game finally.
But with the lead, they also stopped giving him the ball a ton, too. They could have featured him a little more if they wanted to.
I think they could have, yeah. I don't know what that ankle was, but maybe then they saw the 60-yard run. You're right. I mean, there's some things that we're not sure if he had been on the field a little bit more, had they have changed things. But I think once you get that snowball effect where you fall too far behind and it's kind of a little bit predictable on what the Commanders had to do, I think it really put them in a bad spot. Now, I think the one that hurt them really was in the second half and just really kind of they had some momentum going there. We thought, okay, they might get back in the game, down only 11, and that was the end of that. And then it was a snowball toward the Eagles' side. So, again, the Commanders still young, learning how to win. They weren't a big turnover team, but the funny thing is their turnovers really, like, piled up after. And then the Jane Daniels interception was just him trying to be desperation to make plays there, right? I mean, he was playing a pretty good game. I think he just got out of his element when they got too far behind.
So, Vinny, I was kind of making this argument last week that Washington, I guess I'll ask it to you this way. Do you think Washington is more like a stepping stone from this NFC Championship game or kind of some of those random one-offs we've seen make it like a Jaguars or a Jets or a couple of the Falcons teams that, you know, there was a Chargers AFC Championship game at one point. Like, we've seen some randos show up in championship games. Do you think the Commanders are more building or that we'll end up viewing this as a one-off?
I mean, you look at the modern era, and I think you can put the Bengals in the same category. They had the one run to the Super Bowl. But I think the Bengals will be back at some point because their quarterback play is that good. And then I think the Commanders have shown that their quarterback play is that good. Do you have a it guy at quarterback? I mean, that's all the difference, right? I mean, we can say that. You know, Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen continue to be denied of the Super Bowl and big moments here. But you know how successful their teams have been because of their level of quarterback play. And I think when you have Jane Daniels, I mean, you can argue that this was the best rookie season by any quarterback. I mean, he was playing pretty well until, again, the game got out of hand in the second half, and it was just too predictable there. But when you look at Jane Daniels, I mean, he's the guy that you circle and say, we can win a lot of games with this guy. And do you have him for a good 10 years? Probably, right? You know he has that factor where you know he's going to be around, and that's going to take you far. So it's not like you had fluky quarterback situation or things that just broke your way in all these games. It's clear that they have a guy that they feel great about. And look, this year, I mean, they'll be a lot like the Lions, except they're year ahead, where they're going to have some money to spend on free agents. They can cut Marshawn Lattimore and get some money, extra money to spend there. So they're going to have a lot of capital in the draft and further improving their team. And they weren't all that far from getting to the Super Bowl with this team. So Daniels is going to help them travel far going forward.
I'm going to get to the Mahomes thing here in a second at quarterback for the Chiefs with this organization, but I'm going to set it up this way, Vinny. If you believe that 9 of the 16 teams kind of have their guy, right? Nix, Herbert, Mahomes, Stroud, Burrow, Lamar, May, Tua, Allen. And you're the other 7 teams in the AFC. what are you doing to narrow the gap when it's kind of clearly been proven that it's just what you said? It's about the quarterback play. What hope? What would you do to narrow the gap if you're those other 7 teams in the AFC?
Yeah, I mentioned it. I mean, even when the Tom Brady era was there, I mean, other teams were winning Super Bowls. We did get room for Peyton Manning, Eli Manning, Ben Roethlisberger,
All Hall
all
of
these
Famers.
guys. Yeah, they were all able to win Super Bowls. Even Drew Brees, right, to get in there and not have an MVP. They all had a chance to win a Super Bowl in that window. So, yeah, I think you have to keep trying. If you don't feel like you have the guy, I think the biggest thing is to quit early, right? If the Texans, for example, they just hired or fired their defensive or offensive coordinator, Bobby Slower. If they see that this is a C.J. Stroud issue, that it wasn't just a sophomore slump, I'm not saying they give up on C.J. Stroud that early, but you have to think about what are we going to do next, right? If this guy is not going to reach that level, he's going to be pretty good, but is he going to be Lamar, Mahomes, Allen, Joe Burrow good, right? If he's not that level, you're probably not going to have a shot to crack through and win a Super Bowl at any point. So, look, I think the Steelers realized that pretty quickly with Kenny Pickett. He wasn't going to be there. They tried their best, got back to the playoffs with Russell Wilson and Justin Fields. So their 2 little plans didn't work, so they'll probably go for a third plan, try to look for that franchise quarterback again in the draft. So that's what you have to keep doing. If you're not sold on the guy, keep going. But one thing I would say what doesn't work is saying, I'm going to sign a Sam Darnold right off free agency. I don't think the Vikings intend to do that. They wanted to see really if J.J. McCarthy was that it guy, right? They just didn't have that circumstance and he got hurt. But now I've seen Darnold. I don't want him because then it's like a Geno Smith, Daniel Jones situation where you're paying a guy for an above-average breakout season, but are you going to get that top-level play to really say you can win a Super Bowl with that guy? And I think it's harder for teams, I think, like the Buccaneers and Lions, speaking about NFC teams, right, that they have a very good quarterback situation, but is it the transcendent quarterback situation that's going to put you over the top and get you to the Super Bowl? That's the question you have to ask yourself, and I think you can ask yourself that if you're any of these AFC teams that don't have those guys I mentioned.
Weird connection, but on the heels of the Baseball Hall of Fame last week, I was talking about having to adjust our eye from 300 game winning pitchers, and is 190 to 200 the new 300 in baseball that's so numbers driven with how the game is played. Will we have to similarly, Vinny, adjust gold jackets and kind of Hall of Fame talk with quarterbacks in the Mahomes era, knowing that there's going to be a lot of good guys that won't have beaten Mahomes?
Yeah, I think that's the case in any situation. I think you have to analyze, is this quarterback part of the group that's there? I mean, the one guy I forgot to mention was Rodgers. He was able to get a ring then, but when you look at Rodgers and Breeze or even John Elway in relation to Joe Montana, or even Dan Marino, who didn't win a ring but lost in the Super Bowl to Joe Montana, that, look, there's still room for great quarterback play. Some things just don't happen. It breaks. Because in the end, yeah, Patrick Mahomes is there, but the Chiefs are an excellent organization. They don't win unless that defense makes play after play in key situations. They're just a well-coached team. So I think when you have that combination of coach and quarterback, like we saw with Brady Belichick and now we see with Reed Mahomes, it's extremely hard to bring down. But, yeah, I think the interesting cases, we'll have one this year, is Eli Manning. I mean, when you look at his overall body work, not great, but he was in 2 Super Bowls, and his defense actually helped win those Super Bowls, but he might get in just because he has 2 rings and he was part of those teams. And then you get to Matthew Stafford, again, another defense-driven Super Bowl. When you look at his entire body of work, not a lot of accolades there, but when you look at it, are those guys good enough to get in? Then if those guys are fine to get in because their teams made a run, because they had defense and all that, then you're opening up a whole other thing as where, okay, some of these guys didn't benefit from that defense or those big moments to have that opportunity to kind of get that national spotlight to get into the Hall of Fame. So it'll be interesting. If those 2 guys get it, I think there's going to be a lot of things that could happen, because then you go back to players that were really good in there and won MVPs, like a Steve McNair. Then you look at Matt Ryan, whose defense let down a big lead that, if Matt Ryan is an MVP and a Super Bowl champion, we're probably talking about him like Kurt Warner. He's in the Hall of Fame, right? So I just think this whole debate is going to continue. The one thing I think that's different from the MLB and the Cooperstown and all that and what they're doing in this is it really comes down to lobbying for a guy and selling a guy. It's a little bit different there. It's not just pure voting, but it's also who's covering this person, who's going to push this narrative. So it'll be interesting to see how many of the modern guys, however, get into this Hall of Fame, because this is the best quarterback era we've ever seen.
Vinny, I was talking to Ravi. It's been a long time in professional sports that I felt like this, so I'm just curious to get a frame of reference for you. My only real equivalents are individual sports where I felt like, watching Serena at her peak, like if you didn't break serve, you're going to be in for a long day, or, a couple key putts against Tiger where it's like, okay, that didn't go your way. That was your chance. When I'm watching the Chiefs and it's early, right, and I see a ball ripped away from Kincaid, or, an errant throw to Samuel, in the on a little speed out or something like that. And in my head, I automatically fast forward to, shoot, man, that at some point that's going to cost you. You talked about the completeness of the Chiefs, right? Front office, Spags, Reed, Mahomes, right? Chris Jones. They're really, really complete. Do you remember, or is it kind of hyperbole, where when teams that they're playing don't make plays, you just assume at some point it's going to cost them, regardless of when it happens in a game?
Yeah, I mean, there's the Chiefs are going to take advantage of every mistake you make.
It's incredible.
And the Bills, to their credit, it was a rare fumble and a mistake by the Chiefs. They did take advantage of that. But, again, how many opportunities are you going to have to knock them out? And you look at the stats in this game. I broke it down in Sporting News that these stats are very similar for both teams. There was not much difference. If you looked at the box score and you just looked at the stats without the score, you might say, hey, this game was pretty even. It was. I mean, it came down to field goal. But you say, what was the difference in that game? You dig deeper. I think it's those moments that are just there that the Chiefs execute at the right times where the Bills did not, and that's the difference.
Talking with Vinnie Iyer from the Sporting News. Vinnie, as we kind of sit here and we're talking about trying to find, a quarterback and moving on quickly from guys that maybe aren't it. I can't help but kind of think, yeah, but none of them are going to catch Mahomes. And so I'm trying to think of, is there enough other places to make up ground against the Chiefs that, if you're Josh Allen and you're probably Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson, you're probably as close as you're going to get to catching Mahomes.
I think you have to bully. Maybe the Eagles can bully them.
Yeah, like what other areas are there where other teams can try and catch them? Because if we're being honest, it's probably not going to be quarterback.
Yeah, I think what you have to do is try to be found all three phases, and I think that is hard to do because, again, the Chiefs also had a big return that changed the game as well. So, it's hard to do that.
2 weeks in a row, mind you.
Yeah, so they've had these plays that do that. So I think what you have to do is just play your game, be as clean as possible, get rid of the penalties, get rid of the turnovers, execute everything that's right in front of you when they give you a little bit of opening, and take that. But, again, a lot of people just don't have that ability to execute consistently all around the board. I just think of also a lot of what they talked about in the broadcast is the preparation, right? And I think this team is prepared for everything they're going to see about the same level as the Patriots were, right? They were always a step ahead of every other team, kind of anticipating what they were going to do, and then they bring out wrinkles for the other team to stop that they can't handle, right? So, I mean, just involving McJuju Smith-Schuster all of a sudden, like you have to worry about this guy making plays, or Marquise Brown early in the game, like
or Samaje Perine when the game's on the line. I mean,
yeah. I think there's an absolute trust in their system, their players, and I think there's a mutual understanding of that. And I mean, when you see the Chiefs, I don't want to say the Patriots way was better or worse, but the Chiefs way is pretty good. Like everyone seems to buy it. And Kareem Hunt comes back. He comes back into the fold, and he is doing what he needs to do to win games and big games. So I think there's a culture that's created, and that comes down to Andy Reid, that is just hard to duplicate, where it's that balance, right? It's like an easygoing culture, but also intense. And they're having fun, but they're also very intense. And that's a hard thing to do for every team, to be on it every single week, but also love doing it like that every single week.
I promise, Vinny, I'm going to go national here with some of these coaching hires. But one more Super Bowl thing, because I've yet to talk about really the Eagles and kind of what they've been able to do. And at some point, we have to probably give the coaching staff a little credit, right? For every week they win, we still wonder when and if he's going to get fired. And the team seems to really, really rally as a unit. So I don't want to undersell coaching. When you look at the matchup, is there enough up there, do you think, where you can get away from having to talk quarterback play head-to-head in this football game?
Well, I think in the end, Patrick Mahomes is not going to play Jalen Hurts. He's playing the defense of the Eagles. And that's an interesting fact I was looking up yesterday, is that Vic Fangio's been, we know, with the Broncos. He was with the Dolphins last year in the playoffs, that game against the Chiefs. So when I look back, it hasn't been really good for Vic Fangio scheming against Mahomes. And I think you would say that a lot about a lot of defense coordinators, but in particular, his scheme has not been able to phase him as much, because we remember how we saw Bill Belichick and his scheme get Peyton Manning fits. But there's some schemes that don't really affect a quarterback, and Fangio's, that's my biggest concern, is if you can't really slow down Mahomes. By the way, they saved their first plus 30-point game of the season for the championship game.
Yeah, for the playoffs.
That's crazy. So I think Mahomes is on point now. The receivers are all together, and they did it without Kelsey doing all that much. So when you think about all that they'll get it done with anybody. I think it's going to be hands full for that defense. And look, the Eagles' defense has been a great story. It's the reason they're in the Super Bowl beyond Saquon Barkley. Their big turnaround there with Fangio. But I think that matchup, that kind of chess game, I think that's going to favor Mahomes a lot, because he's seen plenty of it going back to Denver.
Vinny, so I've got to ask and move on from the Super Bowl matchup, because we got 2 weeks here. But this thing's been bothering me for like 3 days now. Can you explain the rise of Liam Cohen to me a little bit here? Because
you mean how was the one that how did he get Balky out of there?
How was he the one that finally got Balky? Like I don't, like 2 years ago, this guy was at Kentucky, at University of Kentucky, which is, I don't know, like not a juggernaut. And then all of a sudden he's the hottest coordinator in the game outside of Ben Johnson and gets a GM fired. Like where did we get here? Or was he just the straw that broke the camel's back in Jacksonville?
Yeah, I think they wanted some change, and I think maybe the direction had to be different, right? I mean, they were trying these like ridiculous ways of trying to improve their team. The Urban Meyer experiment blew up. Then they said, okay, Doug Peterson, he won a Super Bowl, so let's see where we're at with that. You know, the Eagles saw a lot of the flaws of Doug Peterson as a coach, but they wanted to go that direction. So I think it was time to blow things up. Look, Trent Baalke, okay, he had success with the 49ers several years ago, right? We need to move on, though. Like, it's not the same situation. We need a fresh look here. So when you look at Liam Cohen again, I think they just wanted a different way. And then when they said, okay, we're going to finally go this youthful route, develop our own quarterback, I mean, keep in mind, this team had Doug Marrone, too, as their head coach. So, I mean, they were really going deep and recycling some of these older guys. So I think when they went in this direction, it made sense to turn the page. And I don't think the 49ers are complaining, because Baalke also helped Robert Saleh get there, and they needed him for their defense again.
Vinny, and I get it, Moogs may be the guy. The Jets turned around. They did everything that they said that they weren't going to do, right? Looking for a guy with experience. We know the story of Glenn and Moogs. Was it awkward, or do you think it's a different style in terms of coaches being so instrumental on the heels of Cohen, on the heels of kind of, it seemed like Glenn was the one that interviewed Moogs, where coaches will have much more say about general managers as opposed to vice versa?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of how it works. And you kind of have to have it all in sync, right? I mean, and different teams have different levels of personnel control they give to their coach. I mean, with the Chiefs, it's pretty even here. I mean, Andy Reid has a lot of input on what they're trying to do, and there should be a collaboration, right? I mean, we definitely saw that in Washington here, right, with Peters and what he was doing for Dan Quinn and Cliff Kingsbury. There had to be input. There needed to be guys that could fit in the scheme and could deliver and were good values, and we saw that all across the board. So I think that is a big deal as well, like having that coach and that GM in sync and not just working and listening to the owner. One's listening to the owner, one's not. I think you got to put it all together.
Vinny, I was kind of joking half-heartedly until we had one of our guys do a little more research. I was talking about the Parcells tree and Peyton, and it kind of morphed into this John Elway talk with Spytech and what's happening in the command in Washington with their growth and now Moogs. You think we'll look back at Elway as an exec differently as this tree that he has that have put these guys in the front office? It's growing by the day. It's kind of impressive. I mean, color me curious, especially with guys like Spytech, and to see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, there's these guys getting new opportunities, and I think it's always good. And to just bring in fresh faces. I mean, we've seen guys come out of different places to be very successful. Brad Holmes was in PR and all that with the Rams, and he worked his way up all the way, right? So you want to be able to have different perspectives. And again, if you're around people who know what they're doing, you're going to also learn what you're doing. So I think that's the thing is like teams are just very cognizant of that. They've been like that with coaches, right? I mean, Liam Cohen example. I mean, okay, everyone looked at the Kentucky on the resume, but the biggest thing that sold him to everybody was the fact that he worked with Sean McVay, right? So I think people are looking at parts of the resume. Who have they worked with? Where are we going with this guy? And the success we can kind of expect. And I think, again, you go to Commanders, they got their GM from the 49ers. Yeah, tap into other teams that are successful, other individuals who are successful, and you're probably going to find success with the guys that were trained by them.
Vinny, real quick, just got a minute here left with you. I don't know if we'll get a chance to talk to you before the Super Bowl, so I do want to ask this. Is there an area where you think the Eagles have a clear advantage over the Chiefs?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I'd say definitely their running game right now. I mean, I know the Chiefs were effective at times with Kareem Hunt and Isaiah Pacheco in that game, but a lot of those stats were padded by Mahomes and his unusual running there in that game against the Bills. But I think the Eagles have a little bit more reliable running game. The Chiefs were great against the run early, but they've had some issues in recent games. So that's the thing that they have. But the question is, can they stick with Barkley? Can they win with that this kind of game plan? Because in the end, Mahomes could push him off that game plan and force Hurts to kind of keep up with him.
That's Vinnie Iyer from the Sporting News. Vinny, we appreciate the time as always. We'll talk to you again soon.
All right, thank you.